Okay, I'm going to review the proportional measurement process again. You may have seen a video where I was drawing a pepper, and this time I'm looking at an apple, another apple behind it which it overlaps, and off to the left of both of those a tomato, which I may or may not draw, and off to the right of the main apple is another pepper. So I'm just going to go through a review of proportional measurement. You're comparing, when you're measuring, you're really measuring the shape of something that you see. We see three-dimensional forms, but we have to think about the forms as being shapes that have only two-dimensional characteristics. They're so wide and they're so tall. It's difficult to measure the depth. There are techniques that could allow you to do that, but when you're drawing, you're translating something that's three-dimensional, that's a three-dimensional form in front of you. You're translating it to a two-dimensional language on the paper, and hopefully it's going to look three-dimensional, but you have to think about it two-dimensionally to get there. So in proportional measurement, you're measuring one distance and comparing it to another distance. And then you might compare it to a third, a fourth, a fifth, but you start by comparing two things. Now, some people can measure really, really intuitively and sort of instinctually just by looking. I was not able to do that when I first was learning to draw. It took me a long time to develop that skill. And if I have trouble, if I'm not sure about something, I can always go back to this measurement process. So I am looking at the total width of this apple, and there will be a picture on screen where you'll be seeing what I'm looking at, and there will be some illustrations over those images to kind of show you how I'm thinking about the process. So I'm measuring the width of the apple. A couple things that are happening when you measure, you have to decide you can only look out of one eye. My right eye is my stronger eye, so I'm closing my left eye. I'm looking out of my right eye only. And I'm also sitting comfortably. I'm not tilting my neck in some weird way. I have to keep my arm extended straight. I don't want to have a bend in the arm. Keeping my arm extended straight, and I'm lining up the tip of the pencil or the right edge of the pencil so it's visually overlapping the right edge of the apple. And then where my thumb is on the pencil, I'm overlapping the left side. So I've measured the width of the apple. Now, this represents the distance of the width of the apple, which I just measured. Now I'm going to compare it to the height. So I'm lining up the top of the pencil with the top of the apple, and then I'm seeing how my thumb lines up with the bottom of the apple. And you know what? It's almost exactly the same. This is an easy relationship to draw because it's almost exactly the same. So the width of the apple and the overall height of the apple, ignoring the stem, they're a one-to-one relationship. They're pretty much equal. So I could draw that relationship any size that I wanted on my paper. I could draw it this big and make it that big, but that's too small. I could draw it this big and this big. I could draw the apple this big, and then I'd have to make the width equal to that. Now, if I want to try to get through and draw these other forms, I at least want to draw the other apple that's back there. I want to make sure I leave enough room to do that. So I'm going to start with the apple, the top of the apple here. And what I generally recommend for students is to just draw the form that you're going to draw with the size of a it's not even quite a fist. It's not your open hand, but it's not a tight fist, but it's kind of a loose, if you were gripping, you could grip a pencil like that. So I'm going to make the apple that tall. And because the height of the apple, and this is going to be the height of the apple, and because of the height of the apple and the width of the apple are the same, so that's going to be the height of the apple. Because the height and the width are the same, I can then take this distance, rotate it till it's horizontal, and that's going to be the width of the apple. So If my pencil is long enough, I can use my pencil. Okay. From my angle, from where I'm sitting, the top of the pencil is lining up with the top edge of that. And I got a few edges here, but I'm going to put the bottom edge of the apple right there. Okay, that's the height of the apple. Oh, wrong pencil. I switched around. I was actually drawing with this. Okay, so the width is going to just quite not to the lead. So I put a little mark on the pencil to mark it. So the left-hand side is going to be here. I'm moving over just a little bit because I'm thinking about the pepper on the other side. The left-hand side and the right-hand side is going to be here. So that distance across is the same as the height, and that's what I measured. I measured that they're the same. That's what proportional measurement gives you. It just tells you how big to draw something in relation to something else. It can also tell you where to draw it on the page, and I will show that later. So now I'm gonna, I have the start of this envelope or bounding box where the apple is going to exist on the paper. I can sketch this out a little bit more. I'm not being too delicate, or I'm not being too precious with these lines, excuse me. I want my lines to be pretty clearly vertical and clearly horizontal. They don't have to be perfect, but they should be very close. That's the bounding box. I'm going to put the apple inside of here. Now the apple shape is roughly a circle, roughly, not exactly, but I can start by I'll start with that idea of a circle. I'm not trying to make a perfect circle in here. But the extreme right edge can only hit the edge of the box. It can't go out here. It can't not reach the box. It has to hit the box. The same thing with the top edge. The top edge has got to hit the top edge of this bounding box or this envelope, and the right edge has got to do the same. It's got to just touch the edge, and then the bottom edge. It can't go short of the bottom like that, and it can't go past that. We want to get right on that edge. Now this doesn't look like an apple yet. That's okay. We're taking this through stages of development. Okay, we have a basic circle. We don't have any volume yet. So we're thinking about, remember, when we're drawing three-dimensional forms, when we're drawing from observation, we're looking at something, or if we're making it up, we're going to be using shapes to create the illusion of form. Okay, so not much yet. So how do I get more specific about my apple up there? I can look at the curve of the left-hand side of the apple here, and I can look at the curve of the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, the curve is kind of a C shape. So I'm looking at the curve. I'm going to change this curve in a minute, but this is what I'm seeing. It's kind of a C shape like this, but it's kind of a stretched out C. It's not your typical C in the alphabet. It's more a stretched out C shape like that. So I'm going to make some adjustments. I'm going to think about this stretched out curve. I can see where it's widest, and I'd say it's widest maybe just a little bit above middle, maybe here. I'm not 100% sure where this is going to fall. I think Maybe it's a little better here. There's going to end up being an overlap in a moment. Now I'm not trying to nail anything down yet. I can erase some of this stuff out, but I'm not trying to find the perfect edge with the first line that I draw. And that's what you have to be careful about when you're drawing this. You're not trying to, you don't have to hit it out of the park the first time you draw it. You're trying to get close to it, but you're going to be making adjustments to get to what you actually are seeing and to what you want. Now I'm looking at the left side, and it's a reverse C curve. All right, so there's a reverse C here, but it's also a stretched out C. The curve looks something like that. I haven't figured out how it finishes at the top, and these are too close to each other. I'm thinking about this section separate from this section here. I'm just looking at the curve. I'm not certain how they're going to come together at the top or the bottom yet. I'm just trying to look at the curves. Now I do notice that there's going to be an overlap here. So there's you could either think about it as being one C curve that goes up here but then kind of has a bump in it. Or you can think about, and so that would be something like maybe something like that. Or it can be, because there is going to be this overlap, and I'll point this out in the picture again. Again, when I show you a picture, a photograph of what I'm drawing from, I'm not looking at the photograph when I'm drawing. I'm looking at the object directly, IRL, if you will, and I'm drawing from the form. Now it is, of course, possible to draw. We've known it for at least, I was going to make a joke, but it's not going to be funny. We've known that you can draw from photographs, right? Obviously you can draw from photographs. And drawing from photographs can be a good exercise. And copying other works of art can be a great tool for helping you to improve your drawing ability. But in drawing one, what we're trying to do is draw from observation. Right, so I was working on the C curve over here. This may be a little high, this coming in here. This may have to be down a little bit lower. And as I try to draw in the bump behind it, and then there's another bump here, I don't have quite enough room. So I'm going to show this again in the picture, that there's a curve coming into the top, and then there's a bump behind that curve. There's another curve behind it. So there's a curve here, there's another curve here, there's another curve in the back on the right, and then there's the other curve that's the top of this C curve. So this may be a little bit up high. This may need to come down. And the reason I'm saying it may need to come down is because I want to have enough room to put this curve here and then put this curve here. It's the top left of the apple is hitting the top of the box. So the top left of the apple, the curve there, is going to hit the top edge of that bounding box. Remember, we measured that the apple was 1 unit wide and 1 unit across, the same distance, height, and width. This is the easiest thing to draw if you can find something that has that relationship. So I'm looking at the curves, how these forms come together. Now in the back, we kind of have 4 bumps at the top of the apple. This one may move here, so I have 2 at the same time. I'm not going to keep both of these. I'm going to get rid of this one. I'll do that now. Again, this is a work in progress, so this would change. This might come out more and then curve down like that. Yeah, that's a little bit better. So I'm trying to keep these things fluid and open. I'm not trying to lock anything down yet, as I figure out where I want these curves to be. Now, one thing I can see is there's an area where the two curves in the back, the two bumps in the back, the curve is the two-dimensional shape, and this bump, we could say it's kind of three-dimensional. There's kind of a bump, the bump that's here. There's that. And there's actually an edge. There's an edge in front at the top, which is doing, it's doing something like this. This edge would continue around, wherever it's going to be, it would continue around and go subtly behind that. And then the edge, this edge is coming up here, going behind this edge here. Okay, so I'm trying to put my kind of jumping ahead, looking at these overlaps, but I really have to be, what I was going to do is look at where these two curves come together and see where they meet in relation to the distance across the middle. Do they meet right in the middle of the box? Or they meet a little bit closer to the right? Now, I'm measuring to this line right here. It's an imaginary line I put in. And that's the low point where these two curves are coming together. I'm measuring to that distance, and because it doesn't line up exactly with this edge, it's telling me that this distance here is a little bigger than this distance over here. And I think that's about right. So I'm checking that relationship. I'm measuring, before I was measuring the whole width of the apple and comparing it to the whole height. Now I'm measuring something different. I'm measuring from the edge of the apple, from the edge of the bounding box, over to here. Notice I'm not measuring from here to here, I'm measuring from this edge out across. Yeah, and the shape on this side is smaller. This needs to come over more actually. Sometimes you're going to be able to see this right away, these relationships, and sometimes you're not. And you're going to have to adjust. Okay, now I'm adjusting. So I move this curve over, and I'm also making this curve a little bit smaller on this side. Okay, now it's starting to feel a little bit more round. Like it has a little bit more of that illusion of volume. That's what we're trying to create. I'm looking at this shape and I'm comparing it out there. I'm looking at this shape and comparing it out here. This might come down. This might be coming down a little bit more than it needs to. This may be able to just go across a little bit more like that. Something like that. Now I have to decide, or I don't have to decide, but it's an opportunity. When you have an opportunity to make an overlap, you want to see if it's important enough to use. Remember, overlaps make space. If I were to choose which one I was going to put in front of which, I would put this one in front of this one. And so to do that, I would bring an edge down like this. Notice how I'm changing that edge as I draw it. And then I would make this sort of hit that like that. Okay, I'm spending a lot of time drawing at the top of the apple, but not at the bottom. So I have this overlapping that. This is going to come in here. This is going to go like that. This is overlapping that. This is overlapping that. This section is also being overlapped by this here. I see a slight bump along this top section right here. It's not that I think the change in direction rather than making this a perfect curve is actually going to make more space. So I'm kind of using that. Then on the front edge, this is coming through and connecting over here. And then I want to try to get this to come forward in space a little bit here. This is coming, and maybe it's going to change direction and go down. A little bit of an exaggeration, but now I either see a shadow or something of the stem in here, but I'm going to let these extra overlaps kind of stand. So I think the top is pretty nice. And then I'm going to look at what's happening at the bottom. Now on the bottom, looking at the bottom, I can see very subtle, I can almost see 3 bumps. I see a bump on the bottom right that would be connecting to this C curve. It goes up slightly, comes back down. And I kind of think of these shapes as where the apple is touching the ground as being like feet. There's a foot there, there's a foot there, and then over on this side, I can see another foot, and that would be reaching up to this C curve or over here. And then right here where these two come together, there'd be a little overlap like that. That's something about what I'm seeing at the bottom. Now, here's another tool you can use when you're drawing. I think I showed this before. I was using a vertical line of sight to look at this curve, to look at this curve. I could use a horizontal line of sight to see what the highest point is at the top of this apple, and I could also use a horizontal line of sight on any single curve to look at the high point of that curve. So if I look at this curve, I can hold up a horizontal line of sight and I can see that the high point of the curve is is not over on the left or not over on the right, but it's a little bit past the middle over here. And that's why this is curving down like that. So you can use a straight line as a vertical line. I talked about these feet at the bottom of the apple, these kind of curves coming together. But where do I place them in relation to the top of the apple? So this little spot right here, where I see a teeny overlap, and then I see a little foot off to the left of that. There's kind of a dark little shadow in there too. I'm going to look at that spot. I'm running a vertical line with my pencil right through it. I have one eye closed, and I'm holding that up and looking up, and that hits at the top. It goes right through about here. So that's a line of sight. I want this to line up with this down here. So I want to be careful about my line. I want to make sure it's vertical. Now I may be putting that up a little high. I'm going to try it a little bit lower. I'm just kind of following that curve. It's connecting into the C curve. C curve may have to go out a little bit more. This is kind of a searching line I'm using as I So I'm using a searching line as I look for where I want that curve to be. Okay, I think that's better. Okay, now over here, now this is going to come out. I see another curve coming down, and that's coming really close to the low point. Then it curves up. There's kind of a dark shadow under there, and it curves down again. So I'm kind of putting this in here. And I may be making this a little wide. So at this point where the curve is highest, I can check on a line of sight and see what it's lining up with up here. So on a line of sight, I'm looking at the high point of that curve. And it's almost about here. So that looks pretty good actually where I have it. Alright, so I'm going to trust that for now. Maybe it's curving up too much is the issue. This is coming back down, this is the foot on the right. I'm bringing this point down just a little bit lower because it seems like it's up too high to me.